Jamaica's tertiary education sector has been growing rapidly. Never before have there been so many tertiary institutions operating in the Jamaican space, both onshore and offshore. With more choices for learners in the market, beyond the traditional universities and a network of teachers and community colleges, professional and vocational institutions, the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission is bringing enhanced regulatory oversight to the sector. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, JTEC, is one of the key components of the Government of Jamaica's Education System Transformation Program. It came into being in 2012 out of the recommendations of a 2004 Education Task Force report, which by happy coincidence was commissioned by former Minister of Education Maxine Henry Wilson. Mrs. Henry Wilson is now the Chief Executive Officer of JTEC.
Tertiary education, or what some people call higher education, is really the fastest growing service sector in the world, sometimes even outdoing tourism because of the demand for it. And some countries have made it their premier economic revenue generating activity, like Australia, one of their premier. So we are in a big league, and we're in a big league not only because of demand and the requirements of supply, but because it is also a highly competitive sector. And there are some assumptions around it, one of them being quality benchmarking. So you benchmark yourself against the best, because graduates of your tertiary sector are supposed to have what are called portable qualifications. They're supposed to be able to take it anywhere they go. If there is a doubt about the quality and how it is benchmarked, then your graduates are going to be at a great disadvantage. And it then sort of snowballs right down into all the other educational activities that you do. So that's the background, and people will tell you that we really are not clear about how many people our tertiary institutions are operating in our space, and that claims are made by some institutions which really are not valid. And so a part of our work will be one to set a standards framework. And we differentiate ourselves from UCJ, or we're differentiated from UCJ, because we are going to be at the beginning of the process. So any institution that wants to operate in Jamaica must register with us. So the vehicle for regulation in the first instance will be registration. And in order to be registered, it's not just a matter of signing up some forms, which will be on our register on our website, but which also require you to meet some standards. It's methodical, it's rigorous, it attempts to capture all the critical ingredients of tertiary education, ranging from faculty, right through to structure of your governance system, right through the whole thing of how do you get your quality assurance, or how are you quality assured, things about your physical infrastructure, and of course now we do a lot of things virtually. But that does not supersede the availability of the appropriate infrastructure for teaching and learning.
We are very happy to be part of the pilot program for JTEC, and as you can see, our layout involves an infrastructure that is very good for learning, and so we have library, we have an excellent laboratory, we have classrooms, and we have an excellent team of very qualified lecturers.
JTEC is mandated by Jamaican law to register, monitor, and measure the performance of all institutions which offer tertiary studies in Jamaica. The Commission is governed by a 15-member advisory board that reports to the Minister of Education, and that is chaired by the Honorable Professor Sir Kenneth Hall, former Governor General of Jamaica and Principal of the University of the West Indies Mona campus. Sir Kenneth articulates an incisive vision for tertiary education in Jamaica.
I begin from the perspective that tertiary education is now an indispensable component of Jamaica's development going forward. My concept of the pillars of development includes the public sector, the private sector, and the tertiary education sector. For me, the tertiary education sector is both a facilitator and a contributor to the process. It is a facilitator in that it provides the human resources, the people who are going to work, equipped with the skills, the competencies, and all the values that we think that Jamaica should have. But it is also a contributor to development in terms of the knowledge which it develops and disseminates and applies itself. So I expect the tertiary education sector to be a contributor to GDP through science and the knowledge that it does and its applications. These are some of that's a vision. And so I share the UNESCO view that at no time in human history did the welfare of countries depend so much on the tertiary education sector. Up to this point, the tertiary education in Jamaica revolved around institutions, independent, autonomous institutions. Many of them had goals and missions of their own, and they contributed to national development. But the demands of Jamaica going forward will require a much more organized system of tertiary education. The question of the influx of overseas institutions, and indeed, if I may say so, new sectors within Jamaica, the private institutions, and there are now several of those. All of that is happening without a structure around it. And what JTEC can do and was intended to do, and we are sure it will do it, is to bring order to these developments without standing in the way of growth, development, innovation, and change.
Looking ahead, the desired outcome is for a well-organized tertiary sector for the sustained delivery of high-quality tertiary education in both public and private institutions. In a well-regulated environment, tertiary students can pursue their education with confidence, knowing that their certification and credentials will be accepted internationally, a point readily supported by Jean Hastings, the Director of the Education System Transformation Program in the Ministry of Education.
Government has an obligation to protect its citizens and their investment. You have your house, your car, and your education, three major investments. Now, when an institution or a business goes and registers itself as a university, with no clear standards or so on, it's a name. And persons go and they invest, sometimes massive sums of money, in the hope of being given a degree or an award of some value. And it turns out that, after years and expenditure, you have something that isn't portable, has no real value. And so, because of that, regulation is important. We know you can't just buy a car and drive it. There's a process by which you're made entitled to drive on our roads. And so it's the same thing. Regulation is important to protect standards and to protect quality and ultimately to protect people.
Regulation, registration, and development. These are the watchwords that define JTEC's reason for being. Add inclusiveness as another key driver, and one will understand why Mrs. Henry Wilson is so passionate about the development of the tertiary sector, and how she would like stakeholders to see the value of JTEC to the education and learning process.
I'd like them to see it as a dynamic entity that is committed to ensuring that our institutions observe the global standards. I don't want to say minimal standards because that's not where we're going, right? I'd like them to see as a place where they can come and really have a conversation with us about how they enhance what they're doing, that we would be able to present whatever we're doing from an informed point of view, using data to inform what we're doing, so that our policies are not just based on notions, but that they actually provide some kind of a guidance as to where they should go. And in the end, I'd love us to have a whole retinue of institutions, I don't know the number, I don't know, that really are able to embrace people of different quality. In other words, we don't just want the high achievers, we want everybody to know that tertiary education has a place for them. So we need to be as inclusionary as possible, because, you know, back to my little old mantra, every child can learn, every child must. Every adult has the capacity for higher level development, not necessarily in the same way or on the same day, as they say, but that they have that capacity. How do we give them that opportunity?
What JTEC is expected to do, and what we are in fact trying to do, is to ensure that all these inputs are mobilized so that Jamaica will have a diversified tertiary education sector. It will include the public universities, it will include private universities, it will include colleges, specialized colleges in some cases, and importantly, it will include the private institutions and overseas institutions functioning in Jamaica.
The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, JTEC, charting new pathways for Jamaica's tertiary education sector.